I had this like really interesting moment where I was in the SpaceX cupola, floating there, looking at our planet, and then I looked at myself and it hit me that I was being bathed in Earth light, the unique luminous signature of our planet, and the fact that we don't live in sunlight, we live in Earth light. Our planet transforms sunlight into its own unique medium, and if it didn't do that, life on Earth wouldn't exist.
Welcome to Next in Space here at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. For this new speaker series, we bring industry leaders and futurists together with JPL trailblazers to convene bold conversations about the future of space exploration. And my friends, this one has been so much fun to work on. Sian, Farah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. At an early age, you both were inspired in very different ways by the Apollo program. Well, I want to talk about that a little bit. Can you both talk about how those early inspirations affected you and how they helped lead you to your current or recent, happy retirement, careers?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm a moon celebration baby. I was born, truly a moon celebration baby. I was born on the island of Guam because my dad was working at the NASA tracking station during the Apollo mission. And I was born 8.5 months after Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. So if you were born in March or April of 1970, you too are a moon celebration baby and maybe don't realize it. But even though after I was born, my dad left working for NASA and the tracking station, and but I grew up with all of this NASA memorabilia on his office wall as a kid, and I just remember from an early age wanting to be a military aviator and an astronaut, and that was my goal when I was a kid.
Wow. And Farah, how about you?
I grew up a little bit further away from NASA, so I grew up in Quebec, and my dad was an engineer, my mom was a teacher, but NASA space wasn't really in my day-to-day. And in fact, by the tender age of 9, I had wholly decided that I would never be an engineer because I was, this extroverted kid. I was always tinkering, which is the definition of an engineer. But in my mind of a 9-year-old, being an engineer was being like in the film The Matrix. Like I thought that's all that we did was like programming all day. And I was like, absolutely not. That's it. I'm not doing that. And then I saw the movie Apollo 13. And I was just blown away. And I was, of course, this quest for exploration, but really the scene that really marked me is that at some point, in Apollo 13 is trying to go to the moon, there's an accident, and they have to bring the astronauts back. And at some point, there's an issue with the air filter, and they have to literally put a square peg in a round hole, right? And you see the engineers working together under pressure, there's communication, there's duct tape, and I was like, whoa, that's what an engineer is. So I think that's when my passion for space kind of started, and I started learning about what was going on. And that was late 90s, so right around when we were doing Pathfinder, and so it just kind of all started from that one movie.
What do you think the mission now or upcoming mission will be that is going to inspire the next generation, the kids of today?
I mean, Artemis that just happened had such a huge impact on the population. I mean, you could see it again. I was in Canada when the landing happened, and okay, first time a Canadian's gone that far. Also furthest in space that French has ever been spoken, which is pretty neat. So there was a little bit of national pride there. That's French, but okay. That's French from France. We don't say that.
Sorry.
But I won't say what we would say. It's probably not appropriate. But I think seeing people and diverse people go out there, and I think the astronauts did also such a great job at sharing their excitement. The fact that moon joy is part of our dialect now, I think that has to be the mission right now that has, I'm sure, inspired a whole generation.
Sian, you are famously a commercial astronaut. What is the fundamental difference between being a NASA astronaut and a commercial astronaut, or is there one?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is the fact that NASA astronauts are career astronauts. It's part of their job, whereas a commercial astronaut, I was a community college professor for over 26 years, full-time geoscience professor, and I took 6 months off from that job to go to space. And when we splashed down, I went back to that job. And so, yeah, it's kind of a little weird, you splash down and you're like, I wonder what I'm teaching on Monday, Like, you go back to this other life when you've just had this adventure. And then people always ask me, when are you going back to space? And I jokingly say that when I find another billionaire to pay my way.
Right. Do you think we're going to find more commercial astronauts in the coming years?
Oh, yeah, we already are. I mean, in the last 5 years, commercial space has flown the oldest individual, Ed Dwight. If you don't know his story, look that up. It is amazing. It's the space race. So Ed Dwight was selected by Kennedy to become a NASA astronaut, and then Kennedy's assassination as the first black male to become an astronaut back in the 60s. And Kennedy's assassination derailed that. He got to go to space at like 91 years old on a Blue Origin suborbital. I mean, that's just incredible. Yeah. And then, an 18-year-old has gone on a suborbital flight. And it's just a large, the ability to open up more space for more individuals on the commercial side.
Can you talk a little bit, though, about the prep that you had to do as a commercial astronaut? Because we talked a little bit about this. Yeah. It is a lot more, it's not just like taking the bus. There's a lot that happens.
Oh, no. We were the fourth ever SpaceX human flight, right? So they had Demo 2, return to flight with Bob and Doug, going to the International Space Station with 2 NASA astronauts. Then there was Crew 1, and then Crew 2, all NASA astronauts going to the ISS. And then SpaceX was like, yeah, we're going to send 4 civilians who had never been to space before up, and they're going to live and work in the Dragon capsule for 3 days. And it was 6 months of intense training. As the mission pilot, I had stacks and stacks and stacks of things that I had to learn. And SpaceX made it very clear that if I didn't qualify as the mission pilot, I would not go to space. And I'm a geoscientist, so learning all of the systems for the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule, and yeah, it was a lot, and it was really intense. But I'm so proud of myself because I was able to do that and become the first black woman to pilot a spaceship.
It's incredible.
I know.
Thank you.
You essentially had a crash course in being a systems engineer, which,
yes.
Farah, you are. Can you, for the audience, I know the audience here probably knows what a systems engineer is. Can you sort of briefly explain what that means?
I always describe it as a jack of all trades, right? So when you're building a mission, when you're building a spacecraft, there's all these different components that come together. So you'll have your experts, right? Your thermal expert, your structural expert, and each of them have conflicting needs or wants, right? Because you'll want to be as light as possible, but of course, stiffer structures are better for different reasons. And so you end up with this mismatch of wants and needs between all of these different systems that somehow have to come together, and then somehow you have to test the whole thing and make sure it's going to come together in space. And so that's where the systems engineers come in. They're sort of the glue that puts everything together. So you have to know enough about each area to be able to ask smart questions and understand what's happening. But you also have to have the breadth to really see the big picture, especially when you're dealing with complex systems.
You look at a general practitioner who also has to be a specialist in a bunch of other things.
Yeah, general practitioner who knows enough about each area to know who to go ask or when to, or when it's time to go see a specialist. So, yeah.
Wow. Sian, let's talk, you know our NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, who commanded Inspiration4 in a way that only 3 other people on Earth or off Earth, see what I did there, do. What was it like to go into space with Jared Isaacman?
Yeah, the first time I really talked to Jared was via Zoom when I found out that I won Inspiration4, the prosperity seat. And he was like, we're not going to mess around. We picked you. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. And then he's like, and I want you to be my mission pilot. Jared is one of the most generous, thoughtful individuals that I've ever met. It's very rare. And you can imagine, you're a very successful person. and you decide that you want to do the most dangerous thing you could probably do as a human, besides maybe go down to the Mariana Trench. And he, instead of giving the seats to his friends or his family, he decided to go to space with complete strangers in a very short period of time. But that's just a testament of who he is. You know, he reached out to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and told them that he was going to do the largest fundraiser in their history, $200 million to help end childhood cancer, and that he wanted to fly a childhood cancer survivor. And to me, if you watch the documentary on Netflix, it's called Countdown to Inspiration4. It is a great look at him and who he is as a person. And I feel so much gratitude that not only did I get selected to be a part of that mission, but that I got to be his mission pilot, that he trusted me, you know, coming in and taking on that role, considering that I wasn't military and I didn't have an engineering background and all of those things. And I think that just shows a lot to his character.
Can I ask you to talk a little bit, because I remember when it happened, how you got selected, and it was a bit of not necessarily the seat that you were thinking of applying for on that mission, right?
Yeah, so, well, when they announced Inspiration4, did anybody in here apply for either of the generosity or the prosperity seat? Not a single hand. They announced it. I know. I'm like, who here would go to space, though? Yeah, look at the hands go up, all right? So they announced it via a Super Bowl commercial, and I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but my phone started ringing, and they're like, you can win a seat to space if you donate to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And it was only open for a month, and the generosity seat was available by donating to St. Jude. And there was this other seat that was prosperity that you could only win via Twitter. And halfway through the contest, I found out about the prosperity seat as an artist and a poet. And I entered that 3 days before the contest ended, and as an artist and a poet, and that's the seat that I won.
And what did you write?
I wrote a poem called Space to Inspire, where I talk about the need for a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space for all of humanity, or a Jedi space. Now, I know there's Star Wars and Star Trek fans out there. This is a Star Wars acronym, but it is rooted in Star Trek, to boldly go together. So, to all the Trekkies out there.
You just short-circuited the nerd brains in the, I know mine. Can you, Sian, you are one of our solar system ambassadors. For those of you who don't know, the solar system ambassadors are a group of 1,100 plus nationwide NASA superfans and volunteers managed for NASA by JPL, who share the science and excitement of NASA's missions with people in their communities. Farah, you also do quite a bit of public outreach, especially for the next generation of scientists and engineers. You both have a gift for making complex space concepts accessible to the public. What is the secret to translating dense engineering or orbital mechanics into a story that moves people, and why is this science communication so important to you both?
Really, you go first with that.
I always say that the secret is I try and explain it to my mom, and then if she gets it, we're good, right? So my mom's a French teacher. She has a limited background in science, but that's your average person, right? And so I call her a lot and explain things to her. She'll still complain sometimes that it's too complicated, but we get there. So that's how I learned to distill things down to that basic, and that's really, being able to do that requires a mastery of what you're doing or you understand, right? So sometimes you have to go deep into what you're trying to explain and then pull back the key messages that you're trying to share. But then, when it comes to sharing with the public, for me, it's a duty as a scientist, as an engineer, to do that. That knowledge that we're gathering of other planets, of our own planet, it belongs to everyone, and we have to be able to share it in a way that it can be understood, right? So I really do see it as part of our mission to do that, and it is part of NASA's mission too. And then, of course, you just bring your own joy to it, right? The things we do are so freaking cool. Yeah. It's important to share that too. I think, you can talk to anyone about anything. If they're stoked about it, you're going to be stoked about it too. So it just happens that the thing I like to talk about is Mars, and then, and get people excited about it.
Excellent. Sian, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, you know, I decided when I went to grad school at Arizona State University that I wanted to become a teacher. And I specifically wanted to become a community college professor. And so after I got my master's, I got my full-time job. And I just retired last year after 26 years of being a full-time geoscience professor. But why I love the community college is that I literally had, you know, a 17-year-old who had just graduated from high school, or could be still in high school, dual enrollment, next to, you know, a 65-year-old grandmother who decided after raising her kids and now had grandkids that she was going to go and get her education. And they would be sitting in my geoscience class next to each other because community college is open access to anybody. At any age, any time, you know, you can come and take classes. And 99% of my students were non-science majors, and they were terrified of taking biology or chemistry. And then they heard, oh, rocks for jocks, right? This whole idea of like geology is easy. And so I would end up with this really interesting diversity of different ages, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic situations, and none of them were science majors. And it really helped me take complex ideas about our planet, about, you know, planetary geology, about science of disasters, and making it relevant to them in their lives. And I've loved that job, but I never have to grade again.
You both talk about your focus on inspiring STEM students, particularly the female-identifying STEM students of tomorrow. Farah, I know you've worked with a lot of young females, right?
I have, yeah, and I actually have a story to share with you, because I think one of the things when you go do outreach or when you work with students, you never really get to see the impact that it has, and sometimes you don't realize the impact that it has because you're with someone for a moment or maybe a class and then they move on with their lives. But I have a story. This was years ago. We were launching the InSight mission, so back in 2018, and I had met a teacher at a talk or a conference or something, and they'd asked me to come visit their school, which is a high school in Long Beach. Long Beach is about an hour and a half away from here. And it was, you know, we have every other Friday off, so it was on a Friday. I scheduled it on my Friday off, drove down there, and it happened to be raining that day in LA, so it took me like 2 hours to get there because no one knows how to drive in the rain here. And I was annoyed, I was late, you know, you deal with traffic, get there, I'm late to my talk. It's at the end of the day on a Friday. I'm like running into the school auditorium, give my talk. I don't really have time to meet with the students all that much, maybe a few questions. And then they have to leave for the day, and I have to drive 2 hours back. And I got home, and I was so mad. I was like, why did I do this? I'm so tired. You know, why did I spend this time doing this? And then I forgot about it. And during the pandemic, I did the Von Karman lecture, which is a lecture hosted by JPL, and it's online, and it's live on many platforms. It's really great. And you get questions from folks that are watching. And afterwards, I get this message from our comms people here, and they share me this message of this student, and she said, you might not remember this, but you came to my school in Long Beach all these years ago, and it was my first time that I saw a woman of color as an engineer who was so passionate by what she did, and just, you really inspired me in the way that you talked about your work, and it made me want to do this. And she, at the time, I believe, was finishing up her degree in aerospace engineering, and I've heard from her since. I think she works at SpaceX, but yeah, so the impact that that moment had, that horrible Friday afternoon, it was totally worth it. Yeah.
Amazing. We're going to do our little show and tell here. We ask our guests that if they'd like to bring an object that inspires them or speaks to their work or the future of space exploration, we'd love to see it. You both have some lovely artifacts on the table here. Would you, Sian, you want to go first?
Sure. So I have always had a love of patches, particularly space patches. And so raise your hand in the audience if you have a patch collection. Yeah, look at this. Like, everybody's like, yeah, of course. And so I started a podcast recently called Patches for Space. And so this one is kind of the patch that I designed for it. And I love this patch. And the reason why is because some of the stitching is glow in the dark. And so when you see this in the dark, there's a little alien in the spacecraft that lights up and the outline. But this patches for space is the art behind exploration. And the reason why I started this is because NASA has a long patch history. And you can talk about every single mission that NASA's done basically through their patches, including all of the human spaceflight patches, starting from the NASA meatball onward. And there's one company called AB Emblem that is in North Carolina that has done all of the NASA patches for over 50 years. And they were one of the original 3 that did the meatball. And so, yeah, and so it's just this amazing history. And then this patch here is my newest project called Earthlight World, and it has metallic threads in it. So when you shine it in the light, it reflects to represent the beautiful Earth light from our planet. So those are my 2 things to add.
So is that patch, was it inspired from your trip to space?
It was,
Yeah,
yes.
You coined that while you were in the capsule, didn't you?
I realized that when I was in low Earth orbit, I had this like really interesting moment where I was in the SpaceX cupola, floating there, looking at our planet, and I'm squinting and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so bright. I didn't realize, even as a geoscientist, that I'm like, it's so amazingly bright and beautiful. And then I looked at myself and it hit me that I was being bathed in Earth light. The unique luminous signature of our planet, and the fact that we don't live in sunlight, we live in Earth light, that our planet transforms sunlight into its own unique medium. And if it didn't do that, life on Earth wouldn't exist. And when you're in low Earth orbit, you're getting literally bathed in this light. And I was like, well, how do we not know about this? We know about sunlight, we know about moonlight, but nobody talks about Earth light. And what I love about it is not only is it the transformation of sunlight into this new unique medium, but it also contains all of the biosignature of life on Earth. And those things are entwined with each other. And we can track that change in Earth light over time.
That's beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
I see a snow globe.
Yes. Canadian in me had to bring a snow globe. I have to have snow everywhere I go. No, so this snow globe is actually about 30 years old, and it comes from a trip that we took down to Florida when I was 9, 10, 11, around that age. So we drove all the way from Quebec to Florida to the typical family trip that you go to Disney World for a few days, and the dream trip that every kid wants, right? So we did that, but as part of that trip, we also went to Kennedy Space Center for a day, and that was my first time visiting a NASA center. And it was after I'd seen Apollo 13, so I was already sort of interested in space. And my mom told me that they could not pry me away from that place. We got there first thing they opened. In fact, I don't really remember much of Disney World, but I do remember the trip to Kennedy, seeing all the rockets. And at the time, I didn't even speak that much English, and I made my parents translate every part of the museum exhibit so that I could understand and ask questions. And we were there all day. So it was a trip, and on every family trip, we were allowed one souvenir. We just were allowed one thing. And so I picked this snow globe, and this snow globe has traveled to every country I've lived in, and it now lives on my desk, right under my monitor. So I see it every day. It's with me, and it reminds me of that childlike wonder that I had, and that I still have, and the reason, the reason why I work here, the desire to explore, that fascination, because I think that's what drives us in the work that we do. So it represents a lot, this little snow globe.
That's wonderful.
Would you go to space?
Yes, I would.
Now, can you imagine bringing that with you?
I know that would be such a nice,
It would
come
be
around
amazing.
moment. You're right, yeah. And I was kind of wonder what the water would do too in there in space. But well, one day I'll go and I'll find out and I'll report back.
We'll have part 2 then. Very good. All right. Thank you for bringing those in today. I want to talk about Mars. Sian, you spent months in 2013 simulating a mission on Mars inside the NASA-funded High Seas Analog Habitat to study human psychology, biology, and food strategies. Farah, you've spent much of your career actually interacting with Mars by commanding rovers and helicopters on its surface. Can you both talk about how those two types of activities, rovers and Mars analog missions, are helping prepare us for future human exploration of Mars, or at least understanding part of the challenges we must overcome to get there?
I'm curious to hear about your experience.
Yeah, so in 2013, I spent 4 months living in a 900 square foot dome with 5 other individuals. And the main funding was from NASA to investigate food strategies for long duration space flight. And so for 4 months, we ate, switching every other day, 2 days, how NASA astronauts eat mainly on the International Space Station, just add water and heat meals, and 2 days of creative cooking using freeze-dried fruits, meats, and vegetables in our Space Mars pantry. And so it was this really interesting study thinking about, what bang for your buck do you get when you allow people to be creative at mealtime? And so I really enjoyed that as a foodie. But what this taught me, it taught me so much. I lived in 4 different analogs before I got selected for Inspiration4. And, NASA's always said the roadmap to the moon and Mars are through these analogs where you get to test out, a lot of things about the human condition here on Earth before you send them to these extreme environments. And for me, I learned that I need creativity when I'm in confined, isolated situations. And that's when I first started doing poetry and art, was when I was in these analogs. And crew cohesion is a big one, I'm pretty convinced that if we had lasted 1 more month, we would have kicked one of our crew members out. Which, of course, on Mars, you want to figure out, what makes a good crew, right? How do you select so that you can have the best success? But we also did really amazing things. Like while we were there, we actually got to drive the Canadian Space Agency rover in Canada from the big island of Hawaii. And so it's those testing technology, testing new equipment, testing spacesuits. These are all kinds of things that you do here in these analogs before you send them out there.
Did I hear that you wrote a cookbook too?
I did, Meals for Mars.
So it's all of how to cook with freeze-dried food?
It is, and I did a TEDx talk called Eat Like a Martian, and how we can become more sustainable using freeze-dried technology, which was developed for space. Yeah. And these are the things that, we don't often think about, but people laugh because I have a pantry of freeze-dried meats and vegetables that I cook with all the time when I'm at home, because it's more sustainable.
What's your favorite meal that you make out of freeze-dried food?
Stews. I make soups and stews, but even in the morning, I'll put a little water in a pan and I'll rehydrate mushrooms and onions and kale and spinach. And once it's sauteed a little bit so it's rehydrated, and then I'll just throw in my omelet and I'll make a delicious veggie omelet in the morning. And, it's shelf-stable for a decade.
Yeah, so you might have to pick up that book so that I have ideas for my backpacking trips. Good.
How about you? Rovers, how are they preparing us?
I mean, every mission that we do on Mars is preparing us for the continued exploration and eventually human exploration, right? We haven't actually landed on Mars all that often, if you think about it. And so every time we land, we learn something about what it takes to land on Mars, about the atmosphere. It helps constrain our models, and it helps these future missions. So there's these very sort of practical things that are happening. But also, both Perseverance and Curiosity, and InSight had one too, have weather stations on board to understand patterns. We know so much more about Mars than we did 25 years ago. But in a very concrete way, Perseverance is starting to pave the way for humans even more, right? For example, there's an instrument on board from my alma mater, from MIT, called MOXIE. And what MOXIE is doing, did on Mars is, the atmosphere on Mars is mostly carbon dioxide. So it showed that you can extract oxygen from that carbon dioxide, which is useful. Well, I mean, you kind of want the astronauts to survive, so it's useful for them, but also you can use oxygen as fuel. And it was able to do that through the different Martian seasons. Again, very much smaller scale than what we would need, but starting to think about the types of technologies that are needed. So to me, rovers, robots in general, are part of the history of Mars exploration. They will always complement that exploration, and they are very much a necessary step in preparing for future human exploration.
Where do you think the line will be drawn between tasks meant for human intuition and tasks meant for robotic precision once we're on Mars?
I think it's always going to be a collaboration, right? Especially when you're on Mars, you'll be limited by everything that it takes to do an extravehicular activity, everything that it takes to go explore for the safety of humans. So the concept of teleoperating rovers, which you did through your mission, or coordinating with activities that may be more repetitive activities that a rover might be doing versus the humans is absolutely going to exist. It exists here on Earth already. But one thing that's interesting, though, is even though I work with robots, I love robots, there is something to the human intuition, especially when you're trained as a geologist, that you cannot quite replicate with a robot, right? And we saw that during the Apollo missions. The astronauts were trained as geologists, and the decisions that they were able to make in terms of, even in their short training, of the types of rocks that they brought back to Earth, and their ability to say, oh, I remember this from my training, or oh, this doesn't look like it should belong here at all, let me pick this up, is something that's inherently human. So that is always going to be there. Plus, it pays to say it because I do love perseverance and ingenuity, but there's something about inspiring humans when you have other humans exploring that is just a little different too.
It's going to be a partnership.
Of course.
And I say this in front of an audience of JPLers because we are NASA's robotics center, yes? So there's no getting to Mars without us.
Absolutely not. And I think it's, for sure JPL and robotic exploration will have a huge part in that. It already has a huge part in that history of exploring Mars.
Do you have a favorite robotic mission?
They're all your favorites. So for me, so I mean, there's so many.
Which child do you like the most?
The child I like the most. Yes. I can't pick. I love them all for different reasons, but I will tell you a story. So my first mission that I got to work on that landed on Mars was InSight, and so my first Mars landing was InSight. And there might be people in the room that were there with me that day. I was very stressed on that Mars landing. You have, as you arrive at Mars, the last few minutes as you're entering the atmosphere and you're seeing all this data come back, and I was losing my mind. Like I lost years off my life in that moment of I was screaming. I was like, what is happening? Like always, and then you hear those words like touchdown confirmed, right? And it's this uplifting moment that happens. And after we landed, one of my coworkers who's worked a few missions takes me aside and he's like, Farah, he's like, you're going to be working a lot of these Mars missions in your life. You got to calm down. He's like, you're going to have a heart attack. And I was like, you know what? I was like, you're right. But you know what's more exciting is the fact that I will be working a lot of these missions, and I bet you I'm going to be this excited every single time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a funny story that I'll say of talking about landing. Coming back from space is spicy, right? Okay. And they talk about the fact that the Dragon is autonomous. But as mission pilot and Jared as my commander, we are monitoring the flight computers in case something goes wrong, right? But we have a very important role when it's splashdown, and that's as you're going through the atmosphere. I'm watching our altitude, and then there's a moment where there are 3 lines: green, yellow, red, and I literally say them like that: green, yellow, red. That's how quick they come. And Jared's listening to me, and when I say green, if we don't hear the pyros go for the drogues, Jared has to initiate them manually by the time I say red, or we're dead. And we have to do that twice. So you can imagine, I'm like green, and we hear the pyros go for the drogues, and we're both like, and then it comes again, and I'm like green, and I'm just about to say yellow. We hear the drogues go for the mains, and then the mains come out, and it's the main. I put it up on my monitor, the mains, and I just remember Jared going, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Take a picture of that, because now we know we're going to slow down enough to not hit the water. But people don't realize that, you know, it is intense on reentry because as the mission pilot and commander, you're there in case something goes wrong.
That made my stomach hurt, that story.
We made it.
You made it. Thank goodness. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. With the rise of commercial spaceflight like Inspiration4, how do you see the roles of national agencies like NASA and commercial entities blending in the next 20 years? We're definitely headed that way, right?
We're already see that happening. Axiom is a great example of that, where you have retired NASA astronauts partnering with commercial astronauts. Some of them are from other nations, some of them are wealthy individuals, and they're going to the International Space Station. You also see, you know, a lot of these commercial companies having their own astronauts. We were the first to fly for SpaceX, but on Polaris Dawn, 2 SpaceX employees went with Jared and had a successful mission. You know, Blue Origin, they were suborbital flight, but they had all of their own astronauts and astronaut trainers. Same with Virgin Galactic. As you see companies like VAST come online, and VAST has a contract to take, you know, a group to the International Space Station, and the same way Axiom did. And so you're starting to see this kind of like opportunity, what I like to say, for a more diverse group of individuals to be able to go and have various levels of experience, whether it's suborbital or orbital. And again, I love that because, you know, raise your hand again if you'd go to space, right? We want everybody who wants this opportunity to really have a shot.
Yeah, I love it. We have some incoming transmissions. We had some submissions from JPLers to submit questions for the both of you. We got a lot of good ones. Thank you all so much for submitting those questions. In the interest of time, I'm only going to do a couple. Serena asks, you're going to love this question. Many young people are passionate about space but don't see themselves fitting the traditional astronaut or engineer mold. What would you say to someone who loves space but comes from an artistic, creative, or non-technical background?
I would say that, you know, your passion is your purpose, and that follow that, and that can lead you to space. Now, I am a geoscientist. You know, I've spent my career as a scientist, but it was art and poetry that won me my seat to space.
If I may interrupt you for just a moment, just to point out that we have a printout of some of your artwork. Yes?
But you know, this is when they first announced the Artemis mission. Before I even got selected to be a part of Inspiration4, I drew this. This is called Artemis Rising. As we go to the moon to stay, and then on to Mars, we're going to need everything that we do here on Earth. We're going to go and try to replicate there on the lunar surface, and then on to Mars. And so, to me, it's really exciting about like, who will open up the first pizza shop on the moon, right? Because I ate pizza in space, y'all. I want to eat it on the moon too. Like, you know, like who's going to? How will we decorate the interiors of these habitats, right? There are all kinds of ways to think about your place in space, and if you're passionate about it and you follow that passion, you will be able to find your way, just like I did. You know, I found it through art and poetry when I let out my authentic voice, and that is how I won my seat to space. And I want to say one more thing. My call sign is Leo, and the reason why my crew members gave me the call sign Leo was because they consider me to be a modern-day Renaissance person, or a modern-day Leonardo da Vinci, because I do art and science. And there is art in science, and there's science in art. And so whatever it is that you're passionate about, not only find the creative side to that, and that goes to all of you JPLers here, you are all creative every day in everything that you do. I mean, from the designs of these complex spacecraft to the way you express yourself with fashion. You are creative, and recognizing that creativity. And to the artist, you know, being able to see the science and the technology in what you do is so important. So we all need to be modern-day Renaissance individuals.
I love it. We had a bet going that Leo refer to low Earth orbit. So I'm glad you clarified.
Did anybody have Leonardo?
No, that's very good, very good.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask for a quick answer on this in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we end on time. Kala and many JPLers asked a version of this question. What earthly comfort do you think is most vital to integrate into future long-duration spacecraft? What comforts or activities would you want on your next flight if money and logistics were no issue?
Oh my gosh, what a question.
Whoa.
I think food, you talked about food a lot, right? But it feels like, and it's for me the same thing, right? I think culturally as humans, we gather around food. Yeah. It's traditions, it's every holiday or time that you're, like, I go home, my mom's like, what do you want to eat? So the ability to have maybe more varied food or foods from home or those flavors for me, I think that might be important, especially on those very long trips.
Oh, I would say, yeah, JPLers, the replicator, like somebody make that. But that and
that
the other
coming
thing,
up on this show.
we need the replicator and we need the holodeck. If there was no money and you could make anything. Oh my goodness, somebody make the holodeck, right, for those long duration space flights.
I feel like we're getting there.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for those questions. I'm going to return to a couple of mine. Sian, from looking out the cupola of the Dragon spacecraft, and Farah, from looking through the lenses of the Perseverance rover, how has your work changed your perspective on our home planet?
I think, I always knew that Earth was fragile and it is one of the planets we study the most, but there was a moment actually on Perseverance, when your rovers land and you get the first few pictures, I remember having this moment of like, oh my gosh, my baby's so far, but also, what a horrible planet is this, right? You look around and I think people don't realize how cold it is, arid, and you see the pictures and it's a beautiful planet. But when you put yourself, there, because you're physically there through your rover, you realize just how beautiful your home planet is. And it's strange to say that it took me, virtually traveling all the way to Mars to really feel that in my heart, right? Your planet is special, but you don't really realize how special it is until you spend multiple days exploring another one and realize just the stark differences. So I think that surprised me when I started internalizing the beauty of this planet and how well balanced it is. And you study the history of Venus and Mars and what's happened to them, and it's just one little thing that's slightly different with those planets that caused them to be entirely different from ours in these places where we cannot live. And so you look at ours then and think, okay, what impact are we having on our own planet, and how do we protect it, because it's such a jewel.
How about you, Sian? How's your perspective changed?
It goes back to that moment when I was being bathed in Earthlight, and I always thought that the thing that was my purpose was to be able to go and have that overview effect that, coined by Frank White, that moment when you see the planet and it transforms you. But, getting to space wasn't the end goal, because we never know what the ripple effect was. And what I learned was that I went to space so that I could experience Earthlight, and that my true purpose is to bring Earthlight down to Earth. And it changed my entire world, because I came back and I was so captivated by this light, right? This unique luminous signature of our planet and its implications for climate and life and how we impact it. And that for the first time I wrote a science book. Never in my life would I have thought that I would ever write a science book, but I wrote this book titled Earthlight. And now, just last week, I had the opening of a planetarium show at the Boston Museum of Science called Earthlight World. Thank you.
We have one final thought. We ask we're going to send a Next 90 postcard to celebrate our Next 90. It's JPL's 90th anniversary this year. We end our show by asking our outside guests for a final thought. So send your postcard, Sian.
named my company Space to Inspire before I got selected for Inspiration4. And the reason why it was Space to Inspire is because it's not for outer space. It's about this space, the space that makes you, you. There will only ever be one of you in existence, and how you use your beautiful, unique space to inspire yourself and those around you matters. And always, always let your earth light shine.
Whew, we're not going to top that. All right. That went so quickly. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. On behalf of everyone at Next in Space, Sian, Farah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And for all of you watching, thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time, stay curious, be kind, and dare mighty things. Thanks, everybody.